Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would talk about this little video that I found very, very interesting. And this video is going to be by this one channel called Dante's Boxing Nation. So, we're going to see overall what he has to say because apparently George Kambosos, who of course ended up getting a very decent upset over Teofimo Lopez. I believe the fight now was a couple of weeks ago, but if I'm wrong, someone corrects me. Now, of course, Teofimo Lopez, I believe in that fight was about a 13-1 favorite. I personally thought those odds were a little bit ridiculous because I knew George Kambosos was at least a decent fighter. He was undefeated heading in there, and I seen him have some very decent performances over Mickey Bay and Lee Selby, two former champions. Now, I don't think that either of those fighters are A-grade fighters, but beating those guys proves to me that you're at least a very decent fighter. And George Kambosos was able to get the clear victory, in my opinion, over Teofimo Lopez. It was a competitive fight, but at the end of the day, I thought George Kambosos clearly outboxed him. I thought all in all that he showed great boxing ability over Teofimo Lopez. And George Kambosos, apparently next he was supposed to face either a Devin Haney or possibly a Gervonta Tank Davis. But George Kambosos, he's the one overall with the multiple doors open. He can basically face whoever he wants. And he says that he wants to face Vasyl Lomachenko next. And I think that that's a great fight, actually. I think overall that that's a very, very interesting fight. Now, of course, what I have loved is seeing the unification fight between George Kambosos and Devin Haney. Yes, of course, but you know why I actually like the Vasyl Lomachenko versus George Kambosos fight better? Because this is my opinion about George Kambosos, and some people may disagree. I obviously have a lot of respect for George Kambosos. As I always say, I have a lot of respect for any fighters that jump into the ring. But George Kambosos, in my opinion, if he were to face Devin Haney or Gervonta Tank Davis or Vasyl Lomachenko, I don't think that he's going to beat any of those guys. What am I basically saying? I think that George Kambosos, I think that he is a unified champion, but out of any of the other most recent unified champions that I've seen, he's probably the weakest unified champion that I've seen out of any other division. And a certain amount of people overall may disagree with that. Now, who knows? He may face Devin Haney and Vasyl Lomachenko and possibly beat them, and he may surprise me. But I think a certain amount of people look at George Kambosos the same way that I do. He's a talented fighter. He is an A-grade fighter, but he's not an A-plus fighter. He's not an A-grade fighter. He's someone that, in my opinion, is probably on the level of an A-minus. And to be honest with you, if he faces Devin Haney, Vasyl Lomachenko, Gervonta Tank Davis, I don't see him beating any of those opponents, in my opinion, and I think a certain amount of people more than likely would agree with me. Now we're going to review a video by Dante's Boxing Nation, and of course this is very bad news for Dante because, of course, he was hoping that George Kambosos would fight Devin Haney, and the LDBC and new media, they've been really promoting Devin Haney for a very long time and been hoping overall that Devin Haney would eventually become the unified champion of the 135-pound division. And I do believe that Devin Haney does deserve a shot. But Vasyl Lomachenko, as of right now, I do believe actually is George Kambosos' mandatory. That's if he's able to get past his most recent opponent, Richard Commey. And Dante should have no problem with that because we all heard how he tried to tear down Tyson Fury for trying to go for undisputed. And he basically said that Tyson Fury was allegedly ducking Dillian White. Well, would George Kambosos be ducking Vasyl Lomachenko, his mandatory, to possibly face Devin Haney? Because if we're being real, Devin Haney in his last fight against Jojo Diaz, this is my personal opinion, I don't think he actually looked that good. But it is what it is. And I'm not a person that tries to tear down, certain fighters. Like I said, I'm a very decently logical and objective person. But when it comes down to it, all in all, we're going to see what Dante has to say about this. Let's get into it.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So the truth finally comes out from George Kambosos. He reveals who he wants next, and it's not Devin Haney, it's not Gervonta Tank Davis, but it's Vasyl Lomachenko. Now, I don't want you guys to listen to this. I want you guys to pay attention to how George Kambosos' energy has completely changed, how he's so straightforward with saying that Lomachenko is next. Listen to this clip and I'll be right back.
That's a good fight. I think Lomachenko can be too much for him. He's out for vengeance, and I'm looking forward to fighting Lomachenko next because he can see what he's doing. He's taken the guys that Lopez fought, but obviously he's going to want these belts. So, like I said, I'll give him the shot, him or Devin Haney or whoever makes sense. But maybe
I don't necessarily have a problem with him facing Vasyl Lomachenko next. Not only is Vasyl Lomachenko his mandatory, but I think that George Kambosos, he knows that if he's able to get a win over Vasyl Lomachenko, that it would do great wonders for his career. Yes, Vasyl Lomachenko, he suffered a loss overall to Teofimo Lopez, but he's kind of like Bernard Hopkins, to where Bernard Hopkins, he lost some of the bigger fights in his career, but he also had some very decent wins in his career, so he's going to get a very decent amount of respect. So we'll see overall what happens. But Vasyl Lomachenko, like I said, I don't have him right now in my top 10 pound per pound. Certain people may disagree. And I've had certain people say, oh man, you're crazy. Even some of the greatest overall had, certain losses and they were still top 10 pound per pound. Vasyl Lomachenko overall is still one of the most skilled fighters in the world. I think that he is one of the most skilled fighters in the world, undoubtedly. But let's be real about this here for a second. Vasyl Lomachenko is a 3-weight division champion. I give him a lot of credit. I've never went to the lengths of calling Vasyl Lomachenko a hype job because I don't think that he is a hype job. I think beating Guillermo Rigondeaux, beating Gary Russell Jr., beating Jorge Linares at the time, beating Nicholas Walters, especially in the fashion that he was able to, that's a fighter that is no joke. That is a fighter that, in my opinion, is a real deal fighter. But at this point in time, you have to understand my perspective. As of right now, Vasyl Lomachenko, he doesn't have any belts as of right now when it comes down to it. And on top of that, he did lose the biggest challenge of his career against Teofimo Lopez. Now, in my opinion, was Teofimo Lopez regarded as highly as Guillermo Rigondeaux or possibly even some of the other fighters? Maybe not. But Teofimo Lopez, at the end of the day, not only because of his size, but because overall of his power and the dilemma that he possibly was going to get the Vasyl Lomachenko, you lost that fight. It's kind of like when Israel Adesanya in the UFC, he lost to Jan Blachowicz. Yes, certain people may look at Robert Whittaker or some other fighters, maybe even higher in the pound per pound list at the time. But Jan Blachowicz was going to be the biggest challenge for you because he provided significant challenges for you, not only with his skill set, but also with his size. And if you're going to be in that discussion as a top 5 pound per pound fighter, I understand Lomachenko's size, that can be a little bit of a detriment to him because he does not have, the same gifts physically in terms of reach and in terms of punch resistance as a Terrence Crawford or a Canelo Alvarez, because Terrence was gifted with a 74-inch reach and he's a natural welterweight anyway when he rehydrates. Canelo is a person that has great punch resistance, and all in all, he's a big guy for his divisions. When it comes down to it, I understand that Vasyl Lomachenko, he's not necessarily gifted those same things. But at the end of the day, if you're going to be ranked, as a top 5 pound per pound fighter, you not only have to be, in my opinion, one of the best in your division or debatably the best in your division, but when it comes down to it, you have to be the best throughout a multitude of weight divisions, meaning that you have to be coming up with an answer overall no matter who you fight. Now, I can maybe, understand the loss to Teofimo Lopez. I don't think that Lomachenko put on the best performance. If he is able to get a win over George Kambosos, he would then re-enter my top 10 pound per pound. That would not be enough, in my opinion, to put him top 5 pound per pound. But then if Lomachenko is able to defeat someone like a Devin Haney or a Gervonta Tank Davis especially, he certainly would be right back in my top 5 pound per pound, no doubt about it.
Want to get one back for Lopez without the belts, just to make a statement.
Now, did you guys notice how George Kambosos, he made it sound as if he had completely already made up his mind? He mentions Devin Haney's name towards the end, and he says, and maybe others, if it makes sense. But when he talks about Lomachenko, he says, I want him next. Now notice when George Kambosos was talking about a possible fight with Devin Haney, before Devin Haney beat Jojo Diaz, Devin Haney, he had to go through an audition. He had to qualify to fight George Kambosos, according to George. Remember, George was saying, well, the fight has to be in Australia. He has to perform a certain way. I have to get a certain amount of money. I have to be the A side. He said all of these things when it came to Devin Haney. But when it comes to Lomachenko, there is no audition. He didn't say anything about the fight having to happen in Australia. He didn't say anything about how Lomachenko has to perform. He says, I want to fight Lomachenko next.
Well, once again, Dante, you should have no problem with that because it's an alleged mandatory. And we all know how you try to allege that Tyson Fury was allegedly ducking Dillian Whyte out of his mandatory because apparently he was going for the complete unified belt against Alexander Usyk. So this is just a mandatory, right, Dante? Like I said, Dante, he's not as stupid as he tries to overall to give off, but he tries to play out a certain amount of these narratives because, once again, he's very over-emotional and he has a pro-racial agenda. So it is what it is. Dante knows just as well as I do that if Vasyl Lomachenko and George Kambosos happens, there's a very decent chance that Vasyl Lomachenko is going to get those belts back, and there's a very decent chance that Vasyl Lomachenko then is going to be once again hyped up as one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world, and Dante does not want that. So it is what it is. But it'll be very, very interesting. Like I said, I actually like that fight. And of course, George Kambosos, in my opinion, already has his mind made up. I think that he would rather fight Lomachenko. If you're a person at 135, you're a person that would probably rather fight either a Gervonta Tank Davis or a Vasyl Lomachenko next than a Devin Haney, because yes, Devin Haney has the belt, but he just gets nowhere near the same amount of attention as a Vasyl Lomachenko or as a Gervonta Tank Davis. So there's certain people all in all that, yeah, they may be champions, but they're just nowhere near the risk. And those certain fighters would include certain Cuban fighters like a Guillermo Rigondeaux or an Araceli Lara or a Yuriorkis Gamboa, or other certain fighters that may be like a Devin Haney or a Demetrius Andrade, to where they just do not have, the same pizzazz as some of those other fighters.
Aren't boxers all supposed to be created equal?
And when I'm talking about pizzazz, I'm talking about marketability. Devin Haney is in a very tough spot because he's pretty much the same as a Demetrius Andrade. Decently slick fighter, but no one takes a look at Devin Haney and says, oh my God, this is the best fighter that I've ever seen, or he truly is, in terms of skills, a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter. No one really looks at him like that. It just is what it is.
Why no audition for Lomachenko? Why no stipulations for Lomachenko? These are all rhetorical questions. George Kambosos is pulling a Teofimo Lopez, and he may be better at the NBF game than even Teofimo Lopez was, and that's pretty damn scary. Now, George did mention Devin Haney.
Well, Dante, you said that one of the best white fighters in the world, because apparently, according to Dante, Tyson Fury is not a good white fighter. That's what he said, or a good Caucasian fighter. Vasyl Lomachenko is one of the two best white fighters in the world. Josh Taylor, according to you, is first. Vasyl Lomachenko is second. So you should have no problem with this fight.
His name, he said Devin Haney and others way towards the end. But the most important thing to pay attention to is, once again, he did not say that Loma has to qualify to fight me. You have an option to fight against Devin Haney for the undisputed title. Devin was willing to go to Kambosos' backyard in Australia. He was willing to give him the money that he wants. That's another thing, guys. There is no doubt about it. Kambosos will be taking a pay cut if he picks Lomachenko over Devin Haney.
I'm not so sure about that because I think the fight, all in all, may get more views, and we'll see what happens. I mean, DAZN is paying Devin Haney a certain amount of money, but I'm not necessarily sure if that means that George Kambosos 100% will make more money overall against Devin Haney, but we'll see what happens. But I think George Kambosos is looking at this a little bit further, and I think he's saying that if I'm able to possibly beat Vasyl Lomachenko, then I'm really overall going to get a certain amount of people on my side, because Vasyl Lomachenko still has a lot of notoriety, and he still overall has a lot of notability overall with a certain amount of people. There's still a certain amount of people that believe that Vasyl Lomachenko, that he truly is the number one pound per pound. Now, of course, I can't say that because I need to see you get a series of A-grade wins. Like I said, if Vasyl Lomachenko, in my opinion, is going to come back into that conversation as debatably the number one pound per pound fighter, he has to defeat not only possibly George Kambosos, but he's probably going to have to get a win overall over Gervonta Tank Davis.
In fact, he will make much more money against Devin Haney. But he's not the first person that's willing to take less money to fight someone who doesn't have a belt rather than fighting the actual champion. Once again, Teofimo did.
Well, this is a mandatory, Dante. Once again, you should have no problem with this. You're alleging all this bullshit that Tyson Fury is apparently ducking Dillian White, or that he's going to try to duck Dillian White because he's his mandatory and Tyson Fury is trying to go after undisputed. So how come you have a problem with this?
The exact same thing. Before Teo signed a contract to fight against Kambosos, Teofimo was offered $4 million to fight against Devin Haney. Do you guys know how much Bob Arum was going to pay Teofimo to fight George Kambosos? $1.5 million. Guys, wouldn't you think right there you have two options on the table? Kambosos for $1.5 million or Devin Haney for another belt for undisputed. $4 million is on the table to fight Devin Haney. Wouldn't you think that if Teo truly believed in himself, he would have went after the biggest payday for undisputed against Devin Haney, right? Guys, this is exactly what George Kambosos is attempting to do right now. He's willing to fight Lomachenko for less money and no belt and no audition. The week of the Haney versus Diaz fight.
Right, but like I said, Vasyl Lomachenko, he has more notoriety than that of a Devin Haney. So I think if George Kambosos, if he takes a look and he sees this opportunity to fight Lomachenko, I think he sees this as a great opportunity. If he is somehow able to get this win under his belt, I don't personally think that George Kambosos would beat Lomachenko, but he surprised me once before against Teofimo Lopez. Who knows?
Kambosos, he did
Lomachenko right now, once again, he would not be in my top 10 pound for pound, but he'd be in my top 15.
plenty of interviews, and not one interview did Kambosos ever say, I am fighting against Devin Haney next.
Absolutely. And of course, you've been everywhere this week. I think you're going to the fight on Sunday as well. But this fight, a really, really important fight for the lightweight division. You said off camera they're really looking forward to this fight. Devin Haney, the young charge now of the division. Now Tio's taking a back seat. And of course, Jojo Diaz looking to become a multi-weight world champion as well. This is a real fight.
Yeah, look, it's a great fight. Not only that, for me, it's a scouting mission and just having a look and seeing who's going to perform. But as a fight fan, I'm excited to be there, to watch them fight, and both very talented guys. And I'm looking forward to seeing who shows more. The big thing now is I'm in the driver's seat, so I want action. I want fight of the year candidates. That's what I'm looking for. I want to give the fans their money worth. I'm not here to touch and run around and play games. I'm here for action. So all these guys, they want the shot. They got to show me something.
So George Kambosos basically said there, if you can hear it, he basically said, I'm not here to touch and run around and play games. So that was basically his way, in my opinion, of saying that Devin Haney has a type of style that I don't like.
They got to really show me that we're going to fight, that it's going to be a battle.
Is that your message to Devin, that you want to see him in the pocket on Saturday night and put on a show? You want to make, and you're right, you sit there now with a Devin Haney fight, or Jojo Diaz fight, and a Tank fight, and a Ryan Garcia fight, but you want the biggest fight in boxing, and you want that to be built, and I guess you'd like to do that in Australia as well, if it can be made.
Yeah, look, that's definitely the plan, to take it back home, because I've been on the road since 2017, and I haven't fought in Australia for such a long time, and that was always the plan. Do the hard yards, earn it the hard way, and when we got everything and we win the championship of the world, we'll come back and we'll fill out 80,000 people in the stadium.
Guys, I'm telling you right now, this whole MBF situation is getting out of hand. This is a complete injustice when it comes to the sport of boxing. There needs to be new laws and new rules implemented in the sport of boxing.
Well, I somewhat agree with Dante all in all that George Kambosos does not seem too interested in Devin Haney. But like I said, I don't mind the Vasyl Lomachenko fight because, once again, I think Vasyl Lomachenko, his skill set at least, is A+. Now, is he an A-class fighter or is he an A+ fighter? I believe that Lomachenko has the ability to get back into that conversation as an A+ fighter. But to get into that conversation, you have to defeat George Kambosos. And then, in my opinion, you're going to have to defeat Gervonta Tank Davis. If Vasyl Lomachenko is able to defeat Richard Commey and then able to defeat George Kambosos, he needs to call out Gervonta Tank Davis.
You got Lomachenko, who vacated his belt to avoid his mandatory Devin Haney. And I'm going to keep saying this so people understand this.
And once again, I don't necessarily have a problem with Dante criticizing George Kambosos. But then when it comes to Gervonta Tank Davis, he always says that these fighters, NBF. How many elite black fighters has Gervonta Tank Davis been called out? Has Gervonta Tank Davis called out any elite black fighters? Let's be real. Has Gervonta Tank Davis called out any elite fighters as of lately? I mean, he says that, there's a certain amount of NBF going on. Well, Gervonta Tank Davis, it's NEF, no elite fighters, period. Because Isaac Cruz is not an elite fighter. I'm sorry, this is what it is. I haven't heard him call out Josh Taylor in a little bit. I haven't heard him call out Regis Prograis or Jose Ramirez or even Vasyl Lomachenko. He's still not interested in fighting him. He still won't fight Vasyl Lomachenko. It is what it is. But he'll fight George Kambosos. You know why that is? Because George Kambosos, once again, he's the weakest champion at 135.
Lomachenko fought several mandatories before he avoided the mandatory Devin Haney. He fought several mandatories to defend his belt. It wasn't until Devin Haney came along that he just surrendered his belt. Now Kambosos is turning down more money and the undisputed title just to fight against a beltless Lomachenko. Even though the fight is not official now, George Kambosos has made it very clear that
I agree. I think that he wants Lomachenko next.
this is who he wants. Once again, before and after the Tank Davis fight, before and after the Devin Haney fight, George has never said he wants to fight Devin Haney. He wants to fight Gervonta Tank Davis next. He has only said right now, I want to fight Lomachenko next. And I'm telling you guys right now, if this fight happens, the winner of this fight, which will most likely be Lomachenko.
That's interesting. Why would you say that Vasyl Lomachenko is more than likely going to be the winner over George Kambosos? This is what I'm saying with Dante's Boxing Nation when it comes down to it. He'll only give certain Caucasian or Latino fighters credit when he believes there is a benefit for him. So if Devin Haney would have been the next opponent overall for George Kambosos, he would have said all in all that George Kambosos is an A-grade fighter and he's one of the top 10 pound-for-pound fighters. But now that Vasyl Lomachenko is more than likely going to get him next, what is he saying? All of a sudden the truth comes out. And I agree when it comes down to it. George Kambosos, like I said, George Kambosos, he is not a person, in my opinion, that is an A-plus fighter. He's an A-minus fighter. He's a decent fighter. He's got good feet. He's got good movement when it comes down to it. Decent power. But the main fatal flaw I see with George Kambosos is that he does not have a great defensive responsibility. He can be hurt and he can be hit. And Vasyl Lomachenko, in my opinion, he is going to take advantage of that more than likely if they face off. So Dante, once again, he's not as stupid as he tries to let off. But he does have to spread a certain amount of narratives out there because he tries to defend the black American fighters usually, but it is what it is. And I agree that Devin Haney is being ducked and avoided by certain fighters. But like I said, I don't necessarily mind this fight because that will put Vasyl Lomachenko back into the mix. And that'll basically mean overall that more than likely that Vasyl Lomachenko will see what opportunities he takes from then on out. But it'll be very, very interesting.
He won't fight Devin Haney. So no matter who wins this fight, neither one of them wants to fight the boogeyman in the division, Devin Haney. So we have Oscar Valdez, who has been avoiding the Shakur Stevenson fight for like 2 years now. We have Jaime Munguia, who is the mandatory for Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo's belt and refuses to take a title shot against one of them. And of course we have the king of all of this, Canelo.
Oh, here we go. The allegations against Canelo Alvarez. I've already said this. Do I think that maybe Canelo Alvarez has realized that Demetrius Andrade is a personal threat? Maybe. Just because of his style and because of how lengthy he is and how quick he can be? Maybe. But I don't think Canelo Alvarez, all in all, is really scared that much against Jamal Charlo. That's just my personal opinion. Or really even David Benavidez. Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, after this Olunga fight, I believe more than likely he's probably going to face one of those guys. More than likely going to be Jamal Charlo, but we'll see what happens. Now, the Demetrius Andrade fight, like I said, that's going to be harder to make because Demetrius Andrade is one of those guys that is like an Air Sonny Lara or a Guillermo Rigondeaux. Not as skilled as those guys, but when it comes down to it overall, at least at their peak. But Demetrius Andrade, he's a person that does not really have great marketability, and he doesn't really have a style that attracts a certain amount of the fans when it comes down to it. And on top of that, you know, when you take a look at him, he looks skilled, but he doesn't look like the most skilled defensive fighter that you've ever seen. At least when it comes to a Guillermo Rigondeaux or a Floyd Mayweather, they're extremely defensively skilled. And Floyd, of course, was extremely offensively skilled as well. But Demetrius Andrade, he's in a tough position. Devin Haney is in that similar position. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens here. But like I said, I don't usually criticize Canelo because Canelo, in my opinion, he's fought repeated A-grade competition. You know, people can say whatever the hell that they want to, but he just recently unified a complete division. And Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith, all in my opinion, were A-grade fighters.
Who's been avoiding Demetrius Andrade and the...
Like I'll say this, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, those two, in my opinion, they're better for their division than, in my opinion, what George Kambosos is for his. Now, of course, they don't have as big of a win in their career as Teofimo Lopez does, but when you talk about in terms of talent and skills, I believe all in all that they would be above George Kambosos.
Charlo brothers from 154 to 160, and now possibly 168 because Andrade will most likely move to 168.
We'll see about that. You know what Demetrius Andrade should do since David Benavidez is the alleged boogeyman? They should fight each other. Demetrius Andrade and David Benavidez should fight each other.
toe. But the difference from a Canelo and an Oscar Valdez is Canelo Alvarez, he won't even fight the best undefeated Mexican fighters. Because that's the
Canelo has fought a multitude of great fighters. Once again, Dante, he always tries to say that he won't even fight the best, undefeated Mexican fighters. There's only 2 undefeated black fighters within those weight divisions that Canelo has not fought yet, and there's only 1 undefeated Mexican fighter that he hasn't fought yet. Those 3 opponents are Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, and then David Benavidez. Those are the only ones that he hasn't really fought yet within those weight divisions. It just is what it is. And like I said, I don't see any of those guys as a huge, humongous threat to Canelo Alvarez, but of course I would love to see those fights nonetheless. I'm not trying to say that they don't deserve the fights, but all in all, Canelo Alvarez, like I said, I don't criticize him too much because Canelo, in my opinion, has fought repeated A-grade competition. In my opinion, he's already fought fighters in his career that were more talented than any of those guys anyway. So it is what it is.
one thing about Oscar Valdez.
Like I said, we could take a look at Canelo Alvarez, and a certain amount of people can say that he's ducking high-grade competition all they want to, but at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez not only recently completed unified, all the championships, at 168, but he fought Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, Caleb Plant. Before that, he fought Sergey Kovalev, Danny Jacobs, Miguel Cotto, Araceli Lara, Gennady Golovkin twice. When it came down to it, Callum Smith, if I didn't mention him, he also fought Austin Trout when he was undefeated. Canelo Alvarez has an outstanding resume. There's no doubt about it. That's why I say Canelo is not just a great fighter. He's an all-time great fighter. He's certainly going to be within my top 50 boxers of all time, undoubtedly, because there's just, even especially when we talk about all-time great Mexican fighters, there's no other Mexican fighter that I would put on his level in history besides Julio Cesar Chavez. I would say that Chavez Sr. right now would be above Canelo by a little bit, but if Canelo keeps going the way that he's going, he could become the greatest Mexican fighter of all time.
Stands that the Mexican fighters in this division are easier fights. So he's willing to fight the Mexican fighters, but he just doesn't want to fight Shakur Stevenson. Because not only does he know that's a difficult fight, but he knows he will lose that fight. This is the reason why we really...
That would be a very interesting fight. Shakur Stevenson, in my opinion, is extremely talented. And I like watching Shakur Stevenson more than I like watching a Devin Haney or Demetrius Andrade, because when I watch Demetrius Andrade and when I watch Devin Haney, they're talented, and I think that they're A-grade fighters, but there's just nothing that, in my opinion, that really pops out of the ordinary, in my opinion, when I watch them. Like, what I mean by that is this. They're A-grade fighters, but they're not A-plus fighters. A big part of the reason what makes them so talented for their divisions, I think, is their length, all in all, and their ability to use the jab, really their height and reach when it comes down to it. When I watch Shakur Stevenson, he has excellent footwork, excellent speed, excellent movement, excellent boxing ability. Like, when I watch Shakur Stevenson, I think that I'm watching overall a generational talent. When I look at Devin Haney or Demetrius Andrade, now once again, that doesn't mean that, in my opinion, that they don't deserve the title fights. And do I think that they're dangerous for some of those guys that, seem to be avoiding them? Yes, I do. Of course. But I think that's a big part of the reason why they don't have as much notoriety or marketability as some of the other fighters out there. Shakur Stevenson, maybe he's not the most popular as of right now, but a lot of people, they're going to be watching him later on down the line. He had an amazing performance against Jamel Herring in his last fight.
You have to give fighters like Brandon Figueroa and David Benavidez a lot of credit, because they are willing to fight the best fighters regardless if they're black, Mexican, or whatever. It's almost as if George Kambosos, he said to himself, if I'm going to lose to any of these guys, it ain't going to be...
Right, but Dante, I don't necessarily have a problem with you saying that, at least for some of the fighters. But once again, he tries to act like Canelo Alvarez has never fought any elite black or Latino fighters throughout his whole entire career. He fought Miguel Cotto, he fought Araceli Lara, he fought Austin Trout, he fought Danny Jacobs, and each and every single time that he fought those guys, he tried to degrade them. And of course, Dante, he always tries to go on this bullshit spiel of, he'll fight the Caucasian fighters because Caucasian fighters aren't nearly as dominant. And this is Dante's logic, at least with what he tries to do. I'm not sure if he truly believes this or what, but it's a stupid point anyway. He basically tries to say, well, Caucasians are usually nowhere near as dominant as Latinos or, the black fighters overall in boxing, so that must mean that Canelo's going after the weakest competition. Well, let's talk about football here for a second. Usually the Caucasians are usually more dominant at the quarterback position than usually what the black football players are. But does that mean that Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes are not A-grade quarterbacks? Does that mean, all in all, that they don't deserve to be sometimes in the conversation as an MVP? Does that mean that I should take away Tom Brady? Does that mean that I should take away 2 or 3 of his rings because, well, he only faced against black quarterbacks, and we all know that the Caucasian quarterbacks, they're mainly usually the greater quarterbacks. Like, that's just stupid. It is what it is, because at the end of the day, we all know that Russell Wilson, that he was an elite A-grade quarterback. Maybe he wasn't as good at the time, as he would be a little bit later on. We all know Patrick Mahomes, that he was an all-time great quarterback, at least in my opinion. Donovan McNabb, he wasn't really the greatest, but, he was still decent, when he defeated him all the way back in the early 2000s. So my point being is this. You don't degrade someone overall just because they're a Caucasian, and you don't make the point, oh, well, they're clearly not that good because they're Caucasian, and history shows that Caucasian fighters usually aren't that good. Well, there's been a certain amount of Caucasian fighters that have been great, and of course Caucasian fighters usually aren't as dominant as the Latinos or usually as the black fighters, in at least as the American black fighters in boxing. But when it comes down to it, there are exceptions to the rule, like Gennady Golovkin, and Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant. They were extremely talented as well. So it is what it is.
Nobody on the coincidental list.
But you notice overall that Dante never says this about Aegis Kavalauskas when Terrence Crawford fought him, or he never says this about Sergey Kovalev when Andre Ward beat him. He never says this about he wasn't saying this about Vasyl Lomachenko after he lost to Teofimo Lopez because he was hoping that Gervonta Tank Davis or Devin Haney would get a fight with him and then defeat him, and then he could give that much more credit to them. So he'll only pull that narrative out of his ass when he really needs to.
It's going to be against Lomachenko. If this fight happens, if it becomes official, it's going to be very difficult for George Kambosos to justify him taking less money and fighting for no belts over fighting against the WBC champion, Devin Haney.
Well, not really, because all in all, I'm sure Tyson Fury, he may get more money facing Alexander Usyk, but apparently you think that is the better option to face Dillian White because he's an alleged mandatory. So, once again, Dante, you should really have no problem with this, but I know why you have a problem with this. It is what it is, because it goes against overall what you wanted to happen. And you know that if Vasyl Lomachenko wins this fight, which he more than likely will, if he faces George Kambosos, as he just said, like I said, Dante, he's nowhere near as stupid as he tries to say, as he tries to lay off. He knows all in all that if Vasyl Lomachenko versus George Kambosos happens, basically what am I saying? He knows whichever A-grade fighter gets to George Kambosos first, they're more than likely going to beat him. So it is what it is.
When it came to Teofimo Lopez, that's all fans and old media talked about was the belts. He's undisputed. It was all about the belts when Teo had belts. But now when it comes to George Kambosos having an opportunity to fight to become undisputed, now we're going to hear a lot of old media and decafs in the comment section saying the belts don't matter or undisputed doesn't matter.
Well, of course, I like the belts, and I think that undisputed is great. But I understand why George Kambosos overall is taking this fight. Let me just say that.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't matter when you think you're going to lose in the fight. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. Fellas.
But anyways, that's really about it for this video. But anyways, it'll be very, very interesting to see what George Kambosos does. If I had to guess, more than likely, he probably is going to go after Vasyl Lomachenko. If Vasyl Lomachenko, of course, is able to get past Richard Commey. And I think that he will because, once again, I think Richard Commey, I think that he's an okay fighter, but I don't think that he's a great one. So we'll see what happens. But it'll be very, very interesting. We'll see what happens. But I just find it funny because, once again, Dante, he was trying to boost George Kambosos, but now that George Kambosos is going to face Vasyl Lomachenko next, all of a sudden, the real truth comes out, at least from his perspective. And he knows, just like I do, if George Kambosos versus Vasyl Lomachenko happens, more than likely, Vasyl Lomachenko is probably going to win that fight. And so would Davis, and so would Devin Haney. So it is what it is. But that's pretty much all I got for this video. I'll be talking about the Keith Thurman versus Mario Barrios fight next. So check it out, and I'll talk to you all later.